Good morning, everyone. My name's Nick Sloan and I'm the CEO of the WA Local Government Association, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Walga's third Emergency Management Local Government Showcase. And look, I just wanted to preempt my comments this morning by acknowledging all the fantastic work that's been happening across the sector. We are living in extraordinary times. What's been even more extraordinary, though, is the incredible response from local government to support your local communities. Now, this webinar is part of a series that provides an opportunity to share our stories of how local governments are innovating to support their communities during this COVID-19 crisis. In much the same way that you're finding new ways to keep your communities connected during this pandemic, Walga have been running weekly webinars to ensure that the sector stays connected and can learn from each other during this time. During the series so far, we've had close to 600 people listening to the stories of 13 local governments, which have provided just a snapshot of all of the great work underway across the state. We've previously heard some fantastic stories about how local governments have quickly adapted to the COVID response through redeployment of their staff, taking some of their services online, finding innovative ways to stay connected to their residents. We've even got one local government who's managed to set up a local supermarket. But importantly, and obviously with the shift now as we move towards the recovery phase, the focus of today's webinar is on economic support and stimulus. Shortly we'll hear from Nebojša Franic, who's Walga's Policy Manager for Economics, along with the Shire of East Pilbara and the City of Karratha, who are going to share their experiences and how they've responded to COVID-19 and the comprehensive stimulus and support packages they're implementing. We've been working really hard to develop an economic analysis tools and data to assist the sector throughout this response. But I know you're really interested in what your peers are doing across the state. First, though, I'm going to ask Nebs to provide a presentation which provides an overview of the work that we've been doing across the economics portfolio here in Walga. It's been really important work. We know that the sector has found it incredibly instructive, and hopefully you all get a lot of value out of the presentations from this morning. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Nebs.
Thanks, Nick. I'm just showing my screen now. Thanks for the introduction, Nick. So I suppose today we have had a lot of requests from the sector for an economic update to this point. It has been a bit difficult given how quickly the economy has changed and the outlook has changed. So we've been a bit hesitant to provide this full economic update, but we feel we're in a point now where there's a bit more certainty now on the near-term outlook, at least, where we can start to provide some numbers behind what we're going to expect in Australia and WA. So today, I'll go through just briefly, just for a bit of context, how the economy was looking before COVID-19 in WA, the economic support that's been provided by all levels of government to date, and then also we've got some data on how COVID-19's impacted on employment across different industries. We've now got some really good data from the Reserve Bank of Australia around their forecasts for the short and medium term outlooks, the GDP, unemployment, inflation. And then I'll touch on the key themes today. You can see it in the title of, the lasting impact of COVID-19 on the economy and what that could potentially look like. And then I'll wrap up by just talking about what it means for the local, what this means for the local government sector in particular. So I'll get into it now. So just to start, as I said, in terms of before COVID-19, the WA's economy was shaky already. So we obviously had the once in a lifetime or once in history event of the mining boom in 2012, which was substantial, and just coming off something that high, it does take a while for the economy to transition and almost find its new norm. So we saw in 2018-19 that in particular, economic forecasts were continually downgraded. You can see that on that chart on the left. So what that shows is at the 2018-19 budget time, the state government was expecting the economy to grow by 3.25%. Then about 6 months later, they revised that forecast to 3%. And then another 4 months after that, so we're talking in May 2019, they revised the forecast for 2018-19 to 2% growth. And then when the figures actually came out after June, it ended up being 1% growth. So you can see there continual downgrades. And what's really driving a lot of that is this persistent spare capacity in the labour market, and because of that, subdued wages growth. So you can see on the chart on the right, when I talk about spare capacity, I'm not just talking about unemployment, because the headline rate, when you look at it and it's got a 5 in front of it, it actually seems okay, especially to the broader public. But when you look behind those figures and you look at the people who are underutilised, so these are people who are both unemployed, but they're also people who have, who want to work more. They're working part-time or they're working casually, and they want to get full-time employment, but there's just not enough demand in the economy right now to support them, or there wasn't definitely before COVID-19. And you can see that, so that chart on the right there, the blue one, shows that for some time now, we've been at all-time levels of underutilised people in the state of around 225,000 people. So it's substantially higher than the people we've just considered to be unemployed. What really drove that? I talk about household consumption being lower. That's a key driver there, but it's because of a few things. So there's subdued population growth. Our population before COVID-19 was growing at around 1% per annum, which is a far cry from the 2 to 3% during the boom. There's also subdued business investment. So obviously coming off the all-time highs, business investment has taken a real hit since then. Another key one as well was government investment. So although that's been a supporting factor for the economy, we saw in 2018-19, the state government actually couldn't get money out the door that it wanted to. So I think in terms of what it wanted to spend on, investment projects, there's about a $550 million shortfall in terms of what they planned to spend and what they actually spent in 2018-19. And all this together means, there's less demand in the economy, there's less pressure on employment, and because of that, there's less pressure on wages and spending. So that's where we were at before COVID-19. But, on a positive note, the outlook for 2021 was actually looking, it was very bright. It was better than it had been for some time. But being a mining-driven economy, it was based on the mining sector once again, and a resources sector investment. So you can see on the left there are a number of mining projects with some substantial investments that were going to take place soon. And then you also had the Browse and Scarborough LNG projects that were approaching final investment decision. So you have that, you have the capital investment side, but then you also have mineral exploration expenditure. So you can see that chart in the middle, exploration by miners was approaching that higher level in 2012, and it's been growing significantly since 2014. And this did actually translate to a higher number of job vacancies across the state. You can see by that chart on the right, which shows there is some pressure there on the workforce, but for some reason, and particularly in regional areas, the capacity just wasn't getting absorbed, and it can come back to subdued population growth once again. But as the pressure builds up, the thinking is that 2021 was going to be the year where we broke through in some regard and the economy bounced back. And then obviously we've had COVID-19 now. And in terms of COVID-19, a word that's being used very often is that the impact is unprecedented. I just want to talk about why, just in this chart here. So this one here shows the cascading impacts of COVID-19 on the economy. So initially, when we first, we were looking at this in February, the forecasts were really around it in not affecting the Australian economy too much, because at the time we were talking about just movement and supply restrictions in China, and it was isolated to that. So obviously that has pretty large effects for industries such as international education and tourism, and also some supply chain issues, particularly we were hearing for construction materials. But at the time, once again, it was supposed to be isolated to that, but then it quickly moves. So then after China, it became movement and supply chain restrictions in other countries. Once again, a larger hit to the tourism market in particular, and also supply chains. And really where it started to become a pretty substantial impact for Australia, was looking like it, was when we started to have wealth impacts, and that's stock market values plummeting. Because when that happens, then uncertainty happens across Australia. People automatically want to stop spending less money. Businesses want to stop investing in future projects. But the real kicker for the Australian economy is when we ourselves have movement and supply chain restrictions, because the biggest aspect of any supply chain is people. So obviously when people can't go to work, they can't travel across international or interstate borders, that's what's going to have a substantial effect on the economy. And that's when we really saw the forecast in terms of how this is going to impact on Australia really worsen. So that's what we've experienced so far. terms of what we haven't experienced, and just to show why, we're not out of the woods quite yet, even though restrictions have been easing. We still have to come probably some wealth impacts on housing values. They'll create more uncertainty. A key one that I'll talk about a bit later is permanent business closures. So businesses that just can't withstand this, shutdown period, and because of that, they're going to close permanently. We've also got, a real key one that's going to really determine how we recover from this is whether we have prolonged precautionary behaviour from both consumers and businesses. And then lastly, there's also potential mining sector impacts. And this one's largely an unknown right now because we are dependent on China's response. So if they implement a significant stimulus and, they're obviously open as they have been for the last decade to buying Australian iron ore, then that will be positive for Australia. But there's concerns around China's debt level because it is significant. And there's also concerns around our trade ties right now with China as well. So in terms of COVID-19's impact being unprecedented, the public policy response in itself has also been unprecedented. So from the federal government, we've had, I'll just premise this slide first by saying these figures are based solely on the economic support provided by levels of government. So they haven't included things like the health capacity and police system capacity support that's been provided to increase the capacity of those systems. So it's purely based on providing financial relief to households and businesses or trying to boost the economy. So in terms of what the federal government's done, they provided significant support there of $214 billion. A lot of this is taken up by the JobKeeper payment scheme, which I'm sure you all know, but there's been also other measures around cash welfare payments. You obviously would have heard of the $750 payments. There's two of those to pensioners and also people on the welfare system. There's an increase in the job seeker amount, so the coronavirus supplement there, investment incentives for businesses, apprenticeship support, and also cash flow support for businesses. Reserve Bank of Australia has also done its role in trying to provide liquidity and funding and ensure really we don't run out of cash in the state and people can continue to invest and banks can continue to invest at the low interest rates or provide loans at low interest rates. The WA state government's also played a role. So their one has primarily been $1.33 billion. So once again, that excludes the $500 million they spent to increase the health system capacity. But that money's gone to freezing household fees and charges, energy assistance payments and small business grants, and some other measures around tourism and construction industry assistance and also rent relief on government-owned buildings. But a really key one for us, and something that's a really positive story. I think the WA government sector's stepped up particularly right now. So we're looking at the support provided by the sector. And we've got a figure right now of $325 million plus provided by the sector through freezing rates, fees and charges, waiving rent on government-owned buildings, hardship measures, and then also bringing forward maintenance and capital works. But we're continually looking at that data, and it does look like right now that's going to be a low estimate. So we've actually got a survey out in the field right now at the sector. We've had 59 responses to that one. And it's looking like from those 59 local governments alone, they've provided around $280 million of worth of support. So obviously that's around 42% of the sector. So it does look like that $325 million figure is a bit low right now. So this one just expanded the last slide, but I just want to show it for context because just to show that the support provided by all levels of government have been significant. In terms of how we measure that, sorry, I'll just go back. Sorry about that. So yes, in terms of how we measure that support, when we look at it as a percentage of each level of government's 2018-19 revenue, the Commonwealth Government has provided, the $214 billion they provided, that's 43% of their annual revenue in 2018-19. For the state government, the $1.33 billion they provided, was 4.2% of their annual revenue. And then for the local government sector, the $325 million figure that we have, and once again, that's going to be higher. That's around 6.7% of their annual revenue. So it's been substantial. And just to highlight it once again, in terms of the Commonwealth government support, it's second only to the United States on a percentage of GDP basis. So the support provided by the Commonwealth government has been around 10% of GDP. United States is only marginally higher than that. So once again, on the international level, it's pretty impressive. And then just to put it in more perspective, when you look at the health, education and transport spending by the federal government, by the WA state government and then by WA local governments, those figures are on the right. So we have $91.8 billion of health expenditure in 2018-19, $45 billion of public education expenditure, and then $12 billion or $11.5 billion of public transport expenditure. And then obviously COVID-19 expenditure has been $215 billion. So once again, it's been significant. But because of this, because the impact of COVID-19 is unprecedented, something we haven't seen before, and because the public policy response is something we haven't seen before, forecasting is extremely difficult. So I remember initially when this came out, there was mention that unemployment would peak at around 6.5% or 7%. Then it went up to I think 10%, and then some commentators were talking about a 13% peak, and then some were even talking about a 20% peak. So it just shows that continually forecasts were being upgraded, just as we saw that this situation was worsening in Australia. Obviously, that's come down now because of JobKeeper, so the unemployment rate forecasts have come down. But I just want to stress it's extremely difficult to forecast what this means, and that's why both state and federal governments have pushed back their budgeting exercise to October. But in terms of what the future of the economy, what's really going to determine it, it's going to be, firstly, it's going to be the presence of COVID-19 in our communities, and then the public policy response around, okay, well, how quickly can we ease social distancing restrictions? How quickly can we open interstate and international borders? And then also, the other one I touched on before, it's going to be around the willingness of businesses to invest capital and employ additional staff, whether they're going to have that uncertainty for a number of years, and also consumer confidence, whether people elect to spend money or save money, whether they're worried about the future. That's what's going to determine the future. And I'll just note it's so uncertain because this is the first government-induced recession that we've had. So it's times that we've never seen before. Okay, so while it's pretty difficult to forecast pinpoint, we do know the economic impacts will be substantial. So this chart here shows the Reserve Bank of Australia's base case economic forecasts, and I've just written down here what base case means to them. So these forecasts are based on most restrictions being in place until the end of June, but then progressively easing during the September quarter. But they have stated they do believe that even to the end of the year, there'll be restrictions on larger events and gatherings, and also international border restrictions will be in place for some time. So that's what predicates these forecasts here. So you can see though, the majority of the impact here is going to be in the June quarter. That's where we see some really large falls in GDP growth, and also where we see unemployment tick higher in particular. And then they are expecting, because of restrictions easing, for this to bounce back in the September quarter. But something I really want to point out, the impacts of this are going to be prolonged, and you can see that through these forecasts. So if we focus just on the unemployment rate forecast there in the middle, you can see that to June 20, they're predicting an unemployment rate of 10%. And over the next two-year period, that's going to progressively go down to 7%, which is still high based on historical standards. So we run on a full employment rate of around 4.5%. So that still means there's going to be a significant amount of spare capacity in the labour market for the next 2 years. And you can see that lackluster demand for the next 2 years forecast really coming through in inflation, because inflation's it's predicted to be particularly low for a 2-year period. There'll be a period of strength in the June 21 year, but that's only because of the negative 1% inflation growth that we're expecting for June 20. So obviously it's going to bounce back quickly off that low base, but then after that, it's going to be at around the 1.25 and 1.5% mark, so persistently low inflation. So moving from forecasted data we actually have, we've already seen mass labour force exits, unemployment, and also reduced working hours. I've chosen these charts to demonstrate this rather than the unemployment rate, because I feel like the unemployment rate doesn't really do it justice in terms of the impact that COVID-19's had. But just for context, in terms of the unemployment rate, so it jumped from 6.2% in April across Australia from 5.2%. And in WA, it jumped to 6% from 5.4%. Obviously, it doesn't sound like much. I think there was a time when 6% unemployment rate wasn't the worst thing, but that doesn't include the huge number of people that chose to exit the labour force altogether. So the number of people that, they lost their job, and because they lost their job, they know that there's not going to be a job out there right now. They've elected not to look for work. So those people aren't captured in the unemployment rate. The other people that aren't captured in the unemployment rate are the people who've had reduced working hours. And we know there's going to be a fair few of those. So people who've gone from full-time to part-time, or part-time to even fewer hours. And also the people who are on the JobKeeper supplement, because they're still considered to be employed. So when we look at how much total employment's dropped across Australia and WA, we've had employment losses of around 600,000 across Australia, and then around 60,000 in WA. So that's around 5%, or just under 5% of both those labour markets. But probably a more accurate figure is hours worked. So that picks up the people who have dropped from full-time to part-time or less. When we look at that in itself, so across Australia, total hours worked has dropped by 9.2% in April, so 1 month alone, and then it dropped by 10.3% in WA in April, so 1 month alone again. Once again, though, for context, the Reserve Bank of Australia, they forecast that the hours worked will drop by 20% in total in the June quarter. So that indicates we still have a fair way to go in terms of, the labour market impacts of COVID-19. So there's been some data released on the labour market impacts by industry, and we know that some industries will be and already are feeling them more than others. So this data is a bit different from the one on the previous slide. So this one looks at Australian Taxation Office data, and it's based solely on payroll data. So people who have been paid when this data was collected. But we know from that, in terms of the number of jobs, so once again, it's different from the previous slide because it's the total number of jobs. It's not the number of people employed, because one person may have multiple jobs. We know the accommodation and food services has been hit particularly hard. So almost a third of that industry, or a quarter of that industry, jobs have gone. But I think the interesting thing for me in this chart, you can see that almost every single sector of the economy has been impacted by COVID-19. So it's not contained to just tourism, international education, accommodation, and food. Even the mining sector has experienced job losses of close to 6%, the construction sector close to 6%, manufacturing 7%, agricultural, forestry and fishing 8%. The only ones that really haven't had a substantial impact have been the ones that really rely on a proportion of government employees. So these are education and training, healthcare and social assistance, public administration and safety, and also utilities. You can see there even healthcare and social assistance has actually had a 7% increase in employment over this time. Actually, just one more point there to note. This is changing all the time, these impacts, and something we may expect as restrictions are eased is that although it will be better for some service industries in particular, there could be some industries that still haven't had their hit yet. I know one in particular I've read about is construction. So there's a line of thinking there that, for example, construction, manufacturing, they're busy now, right now, because it's based on previous orders and previous investment. But considering we've had a number of investment decisions now for, say, in 6 months' time go, and people decide to not make investments in 6 months' time, it could be a hit in certain industries in 6 months' time, even though they may not feel it now. Because the impact is going to be different across industries, that means it's also going to be different across communities, and our local communities in particular. So just to provide, I'll talk about this chart, but just to provide our members, Walgers members, with a bit of context of how their communities may fare, we did a bit of analysis around each local government's individual health and economic vulnerability. So to do this, we looked at a range of indicators both economic and demographic, so things like the number of people in each local government employed in impacted industries, the number of businesses in impacted industries, the proportion of people who are over 70 years old, the proportion of people in lone person households. There's all these different indicators of vulnerability. And then from that data, we analyse then on a comparative basis which local governments have higher health and economic vulnerability. And this chart shows that. So each blue dot represents one local government. So you can see based on that, the ones in the top right would be the ones of the highest vulnerability. The ones in the bottom left with the lowest vulnerability. So we've done this analysis and we've provided it to local governments on request by the CEO. We'll look to, though, over time, just keep providing this sort of info around how each local community has been impacted differently. Just as more data comes out, more definite data on that comes out. And then really a key point of the presentation is the next two slides. So we saw in the RBA forecast that there's going to be a fair amount of spare capacity in the labour market for some time. And that's predicated on that, a lot of these impacts will be ongoing. And one of the largest ones is confidence and commuter sentiment. So I've taken here the NAB Monthly Business Confidence Survey and also the Westpac Melbourne Institute Consumer Sentiment Index. And you can see from both of these, so we'll focus on business confidence. You can see the real sharp drop in business confidence that was experienced in March and then April. So it was obviously hovering around zero. So my understanding is zero is neutral. So then obviously in March and April, it reached levels it's never reached before, and -66 and -46. And then much like the Consumer Sentiment Index the Westpac produces, you can see there once again 100 is neutral on this one. So we've had neutral confidence for some time, but then in March and April, this plummeted sharply. So a lot of the recovery is going to depend on how quickly this sentiment and confidence changes. So, if people are going to be willing to invest and spend money, then obviously the recovery is going to be more quickly. But if that's not the case, then it is likely that for some years, we will feel this impact on the economy. And because of this, it may actually result in a permanent loss in living standards across Australia and WA. So I'll talk about this chart on the right first. So this one here shows the three different types of recoveries that are possible after you have a recession. And it's been spoken a lot about in the media. So you can have a V-shaped, L-shaped, or U-shaped recovery. So that black line, that's just assume that's economic growth of Australia. So if we have a V-shaped recovery, that means we bounce back quickly and we get back to the level we were going to be on before. If we have an L-shaped recovery, we bounce back to the level we were going to be on before, but it takes some time. And then obviously the worst case scenario is if we have a U-shaped recovery, which means that there's a permanent hit to the economy, there's a permanent structural change in the economy, and we actually never get back to the standard of living that we were going to be before. And this one in particular, after the global financial crisis, this is the type of recovery that we're seeing in an economy like Greece. So they're actually on a path now that's going to be lower than was previously forecast, and that's permanent. So just to demonstrate what that means for Australia, if we look at the cumulative GDP loss due to COVID-19, some forecasts there, we can see that it is pretty substantial. So in 2019-20, it's 180 billion, but then the economy bounces back. And then by 2021-22, the GDP lost is only around 80 billion. Obviously, then it depends if that gets to zero or not, is what I'm talking about. If that gets to zero, that means we're back on our previously forecast path. But if it doesn't, that means there's going to be a permanent loss in living standards. So I'll just close now by talking about what this means for the local government sector. Just give me 1 sec. Okay, so in terms of what this means for the local government sector, there's obviously going to be some implications for local government revenue and expenditure. On the expenditure side of things, there's going to be some downward pressure on both wages and inflation for some time. In terms of wages growth, though, that's really going to be dependent on each local government's negotiated wage agreements. But in terms of inflation growth, sorry, just give me 1 sec. Okay, so in terms of inflation growth, when you look at it over a 2-year period, so I know typically we look at inflation over a 1-year period, but if you look at it over a 2-year period from July 2019 to June 2021, based on the Reserve Bank of Australia's forecast, prices are forecast to grow by only 1.7% over 2 years. If you look at it on the 1-year basis, prices in June of this year are forecast to be 1% lower than June of last year. And then prices of June of 2021 are forecast to be 2.75% higher. So that's because it's coming off the low base after the fall in this quarter. That's why we've chosen to look at it over the 2-year period. So we encourage local governments to take that view as they do their budgets. Obviously, though, in terms of now revenue, there is going to be a hit on the sector. So there's obviously going to be a larger number of people in hardship, and that's going to be more bad debts, especially in local government rates. There's going to be less activity in the economy, and that means that fees and charges revenue is likely to be lower. And then the impact on grant revenue, and that's a bit uncertain right now because that's really dependent upon how much the Commonwealth and the state governments want to use local government as a means for economic stimulus. So obviously we're advocating pretty strongly for that because we believe it's best placed in local governments given their connections on the ground to the community and their ability to deliver rapid stimulus. But still, until we get that confirmation of how the state and federal governments want to apply stimulus, it's going to be a bit unknown. Another way that, what this means for the sector, when looking at the health and economic vulnerability analysis, it really showed for us that each local community is going to be impacted differently by this. So it means that as local governments undertake their response and recovery planning, there should be an added focus on the areas of their individual community, which is unique, which are going to be hurt more than others, and whether targeted support can be provided to those areas of the community. And the third key piece that I think what this means for the sector, the third key thing is, I think out of this is a real chance for some policy changes and reform that the sector's been looking for some time. Obviously, it may be hopeful, but I think we've really seen in commentary in the media and across politicians as well that they could be looking at this as a kick that really Australia and WA needed to get some real reform on the table. I know there's been talk of tax reform across Australia, and in WA, which there hasn't been any substantial tax reform now for 20 years in Australia. So there could be a means for that to really support economic growth in the future. But for the sector, for example, a piece of advocacy we're pretty high on is that we believe there needs to be a review into local government responsibilities and income sources, just because over time, the responsibilities of the sector have grown so much, and that's come about due to things like cost shifting and responsibilities being placed in the sector they didn't have before, but they don't have the revenue raising ability to make those responsibilities. So we really think that that's a key piece of work that needs to be undertaken. And I think that a situation like this where you've seen so many local governments step up, and we're about to hear from a couple of local governments around the economic stimulus they provided, it really shows how now local governments are seen as a key avenue to provide economic development in communities. Obviously, their revenue raising capacity needs to reflect that as well. So that's the presentation. Obviously, happy to take any questions now, though, or if you have any questions by email, happy for people to email me or even phone me on those details there.
Hi, it's Evie from the EM team at Wowga. Thanks very much, Nebs. We don't have any questions at the moment other than about sharing your slides. Is that something that we can send around afterwards?
Yeah, definitely. So we've provided an economic update on our website, actually, that's has these slides, and it also has some text to these slides. We can obviously share that update, but if anybody wants to get it straight away, it's on our website, but we'll share that.
Oh, that's excellent. Thanks very much for that. And we will take questions at the end as well, and we can send them on to you as well if you're not available. But our next presenter is Chris Adams from the City of Karratha. Chris is the CEO, and he'll speak about the city's COVID-19 support packages for ratepayers, small businesses, and community groups or associations. So I'll hand you over to Chris.
Yeah, thanks for that, Evie. Assume everyone can hear me. Okay, and thanks to Nebs, really good amount of data, and thanks to Wowga for putting these sessions on. I'm going to start by talking at sort of my perception of where things are at from a broad scale, a global sort of scale, and then talk about what it means for our local economy here, and what that means for the state, and what we're doing here at the City of Karratha. A lot of what we're doing, others are doing, but I think through discussions like this, people pick up little tips and tricks and knickknacks that they can take back to their own organisations. So the data that NEBS provided was fairly sobering around where we're at and the economic outlook and business and community sentiment. But I guess I'm a lot more glass half full, and I actually think that in terms of those shapes that Neb talked about, V-shaped, L-shaped or U-shaped, I'm confident of a V-shaped recovery. And I'll explain why I'm confident of a V-shaped recovery. The City of Karratha is a large-ish local government within West Australia with an extremely large local economy. We have the really big players up here, Woodside, Rio Tinto, and some very, very big resource players, with obviously huge port infrastructure and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of expenditure over the last decade or so. So what's happened to those industries? Well, they've had a jolt, like many industries have had a jolt, but they've recovered quickly. They insulated themselves quickly, and in most of those industries, they're hitting record production levels right now. So we're seeing the port shipping out huge amounts of iron ore. Production of LNG and LPG is still occurring. We're seeing massive export volumes going out. And just quietly on the side, the iron ore price is increasing. So what we've had is in the last 2 weeks, the iron ore price has increased 10%. And while we never wish bad luck on anybody, Brazil, who is a major competitor for iron ore, is really being struck hard by COVID-19. Brazil is just moving into some more severe lockdowns. That's going to impact on their capacity to supply iron ore to China. So I see iron ore price rising and Australia's market share of iron ore increasing in the short term. I also see at the back end of coronavirus, huge economic stimulus packages coming out across the world. Every economy in the world is going to be wanting to stimulate their local businesses. That requires natural resources. It requires iron ore, it requires steel, it requires energy. That's something West Australia has in spades. So I'm very confident that West Australia will bounce back better than other economies because we're strategically positioned and we've got the natural assets that many other regions don't have. So I do remain very, very positive of the future. Not having said that, we're hurting like everyone else is hurting, but I am confident that there's the bounce back and a relatively quick bounce back for my local community, for my regional community, and therefore for the state and for the nation. So that's where we're sitting in. So what's happened here at the City of Karratha? Well, like everybody, we had our facilities closed and everything was thrown in the air, and people had to make extremely quick decisions about what needed to be done. Like everybody else, we introduced rate freezes and fee freezes very quickly. So Council at its March meeting agreed to rates freezes and fee freezes. That cost us $1.6 million in foregone revenue. As an organisation, I've got 440 staff who work for me, full-time, part-time and casual. 215 of those staff work in facilities that were closed or impacted. So I had 4 libraries, 3 swimming pools, 2 youth centres, a visitor centre and a whole range of other services that we had to find work for other people. We took the position that we would not stand down anybody, and we had an aggressive redeployment program where we found jobs for other people. And we worked on the premise that the work had to be gainful and meaningful. So we weren't paying anyone to sit there and do nothing. So we actively went and found jobs for people to do. It was a pretty complex task, but we went out there and made sure that we could do it. And we've been tracking that on a weekly basis by tracking our weekly and fortnightly payroll. I'm pleased to say that my weekly payroll of about $400,000 a week has remained steady over the last 8 weeks. So there's been some fluctuations up and down, but we've been managing to keep our people employed and keep them paid. As an organisation, we have had significant hits. So obviously my revenues have been hit, most particularly my airport revenue. We own and operate WA's second largest airport, and the fact that we haven't got Virgin flying and Qantas has massively scaled back has hit us to the tune of about $6 million in revenue. The anticipated organisational lost revenue for this calendar year is somewhere between $8 and $9 million in lost revenues to our organisation. So we are feeling it, but we are still a relatively strong financial organisation, so we can wear it in the short term. So what have we done? We implemented what we called tranche 1 of our business stimulus package. There was the usual things that I talked about, the rate freeze and the rate and the fee freezes for 2020-2021 financial year, but we have done a few other innovative things. The council has decided to defer rate collection for 3 months. So normally we would send out our rates bills in July for bills to be collected in August, the first payments being due in August. We've said you can pay in August, but we don't require you to pay until November. If you don't pay until November, you will be charged 0% interest between August and November to give it some relief to all rate payers that they don't have to find money when things are potentially tight. We provided lease fee relief of 6 months to match the state government's lease fee relief on their commercial facilities. We have 124 leases in our organisation because we own a large shopping precinct, we own an airport, we own a whole range of community buildings. So that lease fee relief has cost us $142,000 in foregone revenue to date. But on a more smaller scale, we've done some innovative things around. We advertised a COVID advertising grant scheme where we said to small businesses, we know many of you have had to change the way you do business, and you're still open, operating different with a takeaway service or a home delivery service. We'll help you advertise and promote your service. And we matched businesses on a dollar-for-dollar basis for advertising their local businesses up to a maximum of $1,000. So we've provided 29 local businesses advertising grants, where they're advertising using Facebook, Twitter, local radio, local papers, to advertise that their business is open. We established a small business portal where local businesses could register and register that they're open, and you can click on a map and it's categorised into retail, food and beverage, transport, all the local business sectors. But probably one of the best things that I would encourage others to do is we use some of our redeployed staff to do a business phone around. So I had a team of staff who rang around to 401 local businesses, and they rang around to local businesses to find out how they're going, to find out were they aware of the federal and state government initiatives that are available to them, the things like JobKeeper and JobSeeker and the tax relief packages. And we asked them, what could we do to help? We asked them how they were going. We asked them, has this impacted on you? And how has it impacted on you? And we collated all that information, and it's really helped us frame what we should be doing next to support our local businesses. Our data showed that 11% of our local businesses have closed their doors and have decided to ride this thing out by closing their doors. 53% of our businesses have said they're having a reduced amount of trade. But interestingly, 31% of our businesses have said there is no impact whatsoever. So 1 in 3 businesses saying no impact. And 5% of our businesses saying that coronavirus has made them busier. So things like our hardware stores, our garden centres, and that are saying we are busier than ever. So what we're really picking up is that there has been a massively uneven impact in terms of our local business community and how it has been hurt. Some sectors, hair and beauty, health services, hair and beauty, tourism and accommodation have been smashed. But other sectors, constructions and trade locally here are going well. Interestingly, accommodation businesses are killing it because there has been the fly in, fly out market is meaning that hotels are now full with fly in, fly out workers, which was not something that we had expected. We also introduced a community stimulus package. So we have 77 not-for-profits and government NGO organisations in and around our town. We had weekly phone contact with all of those not-for-profits and non-government organisations to identify what the key issues were locally. And we put out a community stimulus package where we said we'd support community organisations and not-for-profit groups to get them through this period. We provided support for things like, well, we still have to keep the local RSL, we still have to keep the fridges going, we have to pay our power bills, but we've got no revenue coming in. So we've agreed to pay the RSL's power bills. We've agreed to provide the power bills for the local Aboriginal art group, who has been struggling to pay their bills because they've got no revenue coming through the door. So far we've paid $88,000 out to community groups and not-for-profits through this initial 6 to 8 week period. But what next? We're currently out there, we're putting out in the next day or so a community survey to get feedback from the community around what they think we should be doing next, an online community survey. But we've been workshopping what we're calling tranche 2 with our councillors around what we should be doing to stimulate both the local economy and the local community sector. We've identified 5 key objectives for tranche 2. Our objectives are: it must stimulate local businesses. It must be a targeted approach. We don't want to be giving broad scale relief to everybody when some people don't need it. It must be targeted. It needs to be rapid delivery. We don't want this being caught up in bureaucracy and red tape. It needs to be transparent and rigorous, our approach. So we don't want to be criticised or breaking compliance. And we're after a partnered approach. So there's lots of information out there. Lottery West is doing stuff. Our local resource industries, Rio and that, have got packages out, and Woodside's got a package out. The Port Authority's got packages out. There's lots of people giving support. We want to make sure we're partnering up with everybody. So we're currently developing up a business tranche 2, and some of the initiatives that have been considered. I will say these are being considered and haven't been adopted as yet, but here's some of the ideas. Our CapEx program for next year will be significantly larger than usual. Many local governments are looking at bringing forward CapEx, but when we're ranking our CapEx, we look at need, prior planning, financial impact, links to the strategic plan and the like. But we've actually added a new category when ranking our projects next year, and that is COVID impacts. How will this actually impact on our local business community? And projects that have got a greater local content are being ranked higher. And that is a specific criteria we're using in ranking our 2020-2021 projects. We're looking at buy local and establishing a buy local scheme where we actually provide gift cards to locals and local businesses who are most impacted. But we're actually developing it with the local Chamber of Commerce as an app, kind of like a Hey You app or a Menulog style app that is ongoing and not just for coronavirus. We're looking at rate rebate schemes. We're not looking at across the board rate reductions, but we are looking at rate rebates for industry sectors that have been most impacted. We're also looking at small business grants or small business loans. What we have found through our research is businesses with less than 10 people or with turnover of less than $1 million have been unable to access a significant amount of support from government. So we're currently working with the local Chamber of Commerce and local finance brokers on how we could support those very small businesses that are needed in our community. We're looking at building rebates to stimulate the local building economy. So we're looking at a scheme where if you refurb your house, get new carpets, get new a paint job or whatever it is to your house, we're potentially going to provide a rebate to you if you use a local contractor. So if you spend $20,000 putting a new kitchen and bathroom in, we're potentially going to provide a $2,000 rebate to you if you use a local contractor. It's a scheme we're currently working on. We're looking at extending the advertising and grant scheme to promote those businesses who locally, and we're looking at providing fee relief, particularly for impacted sectors like hairdressers, nail beauticians and that sort of stuff. Their annual fees and annual inspection fees, we're looking to waive those. In the community space, we're conscious that many community groups have lost their ability to fundraise, have lost their usual sponsorships and the like. So we are looking at how we can support local sporting groups and local community groups. And we're doing things like we've commenced what we're calling lights on. So between 6 and 8 p.m. each night, we're turning the lights on every single footy oval and sports ground in the town for free. That's encouraging the local community to get out and recreate in the open space in these times and reconnect with their local community. It's also meaning that our local sporting clubs that are getting back into training aren't paying for lights at the moment. It's giving them some relief in the short term. We are looking at grant schemes for those small community groups. We're working with seniors groups around how we can make sure that they're not feeling isolated and alone, working with Indigenous groups, and we're working with mental health providers around what we can do to support mental health providers. So there's a huge amount of stuff that's going on. A lot of what we're doing is stuff that other local governments are doing. But I guess what I'm saying is local government does have a significant role to play. We think we are playing a very specific role, and I'm really focused here at the City of Karratha on ensuring that the significant amount of funding that we are planning on spending is targeted at those individuals and industries and businesses that most need it. And I'm confident that when we do that, that V-shaped recovery that I hope and think we will get actually comes to be a reality. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks very much, Chris. Great to hear your optimism about the economy recovering and also about these fantastic initiatives from Karratha. I did receive one question for yourself and perhaps from East Pilbara once they've spoken. So it says, given your comments about WA being well positioned in terms of resources, do you see an opportunity for government to support a stronger pivot in investment to large-scale renewables and other innovative projects rather than continued reliance on traditional sectors for energy production? And this is from Alison from Wanneroo.
The answer from my perspective is yes. A lot of the work that's being done now, when I talk about our recovery, it is a more of the same approach, but more of the same is our baseload. That is what is going to get us out of the short-term problem from my perspective, but there is massive investment going on here in solar, renewable hydrogen, green energy and the like, and that is our future. When I talk about the Pilbara, I talk about the iron ore boom of the 60s, the oil and gas boom of the 80s, the China boom of the 2000s, and the next boom that's coming is green energy. It's green energy and renewables is the next boom.
Excellent, thanks for that. Thanks for that response. So we'll now go to Jeremy Edwards, who's the CEO of the Shire of East Pilbara. Jeremy will talk about the Shire's COVID-19 response relief package called Regenerate Together. So I'll just get you organised there. Thank you, Jeremy.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully everyone can hear us, and I've also got Chloe with me as well. And together we're just going to give you an overview of the COVID-19 response and talk a little bit about, just quickly to start off with, just our emergency management framework. So just a couple of slides on that. And then more importantly, we're going to get into the relief and stimulus. And some of that will include the targeted response to business and community across the Shire. Economic boost to the regions to support industry, and that economic boost that we've looked at is really around how do we make some of the marginal projects within our region become a reality. And similar to the view of Chris, you know, we're really positive about the future, and we're not really seeing that 6% decrease in mining as indicated within the slide by Nebs there. I'm not saying it's not happening, but we're certainly not seeing it within the Shire of East Pilbara at the moment. So just quickly moving into our emergency management and response, probably undertook an exercise that most local governments did, and it was not dissimilar to, but it wasn't, I suppose, usual cyclone emergency management. We undertook risk assessments, identified risk points. The executive was meeting daily. It was a fast-moving situation, and this quickly became really frustrating for us. We were doing things and making decisions that we'd never done before, and the goalposts were changing continually. So when we were talking about emergency management and response to community, no sooner had we made a decision, either the state or national cabinet were changing things. We worked on a phased response, and we also established an internal COVID-19 committee. Did what most local governments did, updated HR policies, clear messaging from the executive was communicated, and similar to what Chris said, we've got a workforce of around about 200 FTEs. Our casual employees, we conveyed a really clear message to them early on that their employment would not be affected through until May 1. And this COVID-19 probably had consequential impacts to us in other service areas. So whilst we were shutting down leisure centres and pools and things like that, Newman Airport really created a problem for us with social distancing. We haven't seen a drop in flights through Newman Airport because the RPTs have decreased, but what's happened is charter flights have increased. With implementing social distancing there and the requirement to do that, really all of our casual workforce were redeployed to assist at Newman Airport. We also immediately implemented COVID-19 paid leave. So that went to all staff, even casuals. So you had 3 days leave, and that would be for health and wellbeing, childcare, self-isolation, whatever you wanted to use it for, use the 3 days leave between now and 30th of June. We've had around about 11% uptake on that. We also introduced flexible work arrangements and also created a COVID-19 travel policy. And that was really just for assurances to get staff in and out of the region and also contractors. So when we move into the economic relief and stimulus, when we developed our response, we really wanted to be specific and provide some clarity around the difference between what relief we were providing and what stimulus we were providing. So our relief response is intended to provide initial and medium-term relief to our stakeholders. And this is primarily around the financial relief programs, business activation, supporting businesses, grants, and getting community and businesses back to what the new normal will be post-COVID-19. The stimulus package that we looked at was primarily around bringing forward a major capital works project in the Shire, and that's intended on creating a longer-term financial stimulus to a regional part of the Shire. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later on, but Chloe's now going to discuss some of the processes and the package in more detail and focus on a couple of the key initiatives that we're really proud of.
Perfect, thanks Jeremy. So again, starting with process, the first thing that Jeremy set up was a COVID-19 working group, and that had employees from a range of different departments tasked at putting together our economic relief package in response to the COVID-19. So we ensured that we had a diverse skill set in that working group, so it was well coordinated and had a holistic approach. So we had employees from backgrounds in research to understand the situation, the existing support from state and federal government, and to identify gaps that the Shire could fill. We had someone from governance that provided advice on legalities and council procedures, someone from finance that could report on the Shire's financial situations and our capacity, someone from community wellbeing who would provide insight into the specific needs and the context of the local community, and a strategic and planning person to provide advice on our long-term strategy. So that group met daily and reported to the CEO and executive twice a week for feedback and approvals. And a fundamental part of the process was to make sure that the package would be nimble and relevant to our community. So the working group presented the Shire's economic relief package and stimulus initiatives to the council in late April. And we waited to develop this package for a few reasons. One is that we wanted to wait and see what the impact was, just as the situation was growing so quickly. We wanted to wait and time our response for when the local economy would come out of hibernation. And we also wanted a sustainable approach and to be able to identify gaps that existed between the state, federal and industry funding. So on this slide here, you can see the overall funding. So our package was 1.5 million in relief, and then the $7 million in stimulus through the Marble Bar Airport. So this package was submitted and endorsed through the April council meeting, and a key message from council was they wanted to target those in need, and they wanted us to work with existing stakeholders for a coordinated response. And a key outcome from this meeting was delegated authority appointed to the CEO to make decisions on the package initiatives to ensure it was swift and easy in the delivery process. So on this first one, we have our rates, and this is a major component of our package. So like most councils, we froze our rates for the 2021 financial year. And we also provided a 5% return for owner-occupiers, small business and pastoralists. So this cost us just over $600,000. With this initiative, we were conscious of our unique situation. So the majority of our ratepayers are industry. So we were able to assist those who needed the extra help by providing that refund on rates for the owner-occupiers, for the small businesses and for our pastoralists. We also adopted the WOGA COVID-19 financial hardship policy, and for those facing financial hardships, we can waive the 2021 rate instalment payment fees and interest, we can waive penalty interest on the 2021 rates, and we can increase flexible payment options for ratepayers and debtors. This next slide is very similar to what a lot of other councils have provided. They're quite common. So we have no fee and charge increases next financial year. We've provided rental relief to our tenants in Shire-owned facilities, and we're helping with development support. So this slide here is about $600,000 as well. Then we have our East Pilbara Dollars initiative. So council has allocated $50,000 to a local cash flow by purchasing gift cards and gift vouchers from local businesses and distributing them to local residents. So the purpose of this project is to assist small businesses who have lost revenue due to the current government restrictions in response to COVID-19. So we're increasing their immediate cash flow and regenerating their revenue by purchasing these vouchers. So we currently have about 40 small businesses signed up, and there's going to be 3 streams where we distribute these vouchers. So one is that we've engaged the local Newman Chamber, and they're going to be running a Shop Local and Win competition weekly, so encouraging people to spend money. The second is through Shire-run competitions and programs, and the third is through initiatives that are going to be run by community groups and not-for-profits. So an example of this is currently, we have a lot of sporting groups that would usually be running raffles to fundraise. So those raffle prizes can be our East Pilbara Dollars to help our sporting clubs at this time. So grants. Council approved a total of $150,000 towards the COVID-19 grant funding. So the COVID-19 grants are designed to provide funding to address the immediate needs of small business, community groups, as well as sporting clubs. So these grants are designed to be flexible and non-prescriptive, just to make sure they're really easily accessible to our community. And lastly, we have our business support. This one's really important. Council have approved $100,000 to form a panel of professional business support consultants. So they're going to provide one-on-one support for our businesses in the East Pilbara region. So every eligible business can access up to 5 hours of that one-on-one support free of charge through virtual meetings. So we've identified a suite of services, and they are business continuity planning and strategic review, government assistance measures, occupational health and safety, grants and funding applications, cash flow and expenditure, and sales and marketing. Businesses can also chat with their consultants about any of their concerns relating to their business during COVID-19. And this next slide just shows an example of our business consultants, the services they provide, and the minimum number of businesses that we can potentially help.
Thanks, Chloe. I'm just going to go through the $7 million that we set aside for Marble Bar Airport just over the next couple of slides. So a bit of background and rationale around this stimulus initiative. Marble Bar is probably one of the, well, it is the Shire's most remote town site. It's only got a population of around about 300 people. It's located 300 k's north of Newman and around about 200 k's southeast of Port Hedland. The current airstrip that we've got there is over 40 years old, and it does service small charter flights, the RFDS, but it's not an all-weather airstrip, and invariably it's cut off and inoperable due to the inclement weather that region of the Shire receives. Marble Bar is one of the areas that supports all the local mining ventures, and over the past few years, there's been substantial exploration and capital investments in and around that region. And talking about renewables, I mean, the Asian Renewable Energy Hub's just got through EPA approval, and that's, or ZAPA EPA approval, and that's a $22 billion investment in that area. But based on pre-COVID-19 data and things that we've researched through Department of Mines and ASX announcements, we know that there's around about $32 billion worth of pipeline projects either planned or underway in this region of our Shire. We also took into account what improvements and access to infrastructure would provide for industry going forward. So whilst we've got $32 billion worth of projects planned or underway, on the premise that there's no access to the airport, so marginal projects that have not received approval or financial backing at the moment now become more viable because of access to major infrastructure if we can get this project up and running. So we partnered with a local gold mining company called Calidus Resources. They were proposing to develop their own airstrip for their operations, which would have been within about 30 k's of our existing airport. And we all know that private airports or jet ports that are mine specific don't have any economic benefits that will be transferred to local towns or regions, and in particular, in this case, to Marble Bar. And once completed, this airport will host an all-weather runway. It'll be 2 kilometres long, 35 metres wide, and capable of servicing 100-seater jet planes, which seem to be the plane of choice to service the mining industry within the Pilbara. So just going into the stimulus and the economic benefits and a little bit on the process, we were mindful that when considering stimulus and this partnership arrangement, and this one in particular is expected to create 300 jobs during the construction phase of the mine site and the airport. It's also going to have 200 jobs post-construction, and during the life of the mine for Calidus, and bear in mind this is only one mining company, they're going to spend approximately $800 million on expenditure on their mine, contribute $26 million in royalties and $66 million in company tax. So the airport's going to create a number of jobs during the construction and also post-construction, because obviously with the airport becoming fully operational, the Shire is going to employ staff to operate the facility. And since our announcement, which was only a few weeks ago with council at the last council meeting, we've had a further 2 mining companies reach out and inquire about using the airport. So Calidus were looking at 2 charter flights a week. These other 2 mining companies are looking at the same. So already we're up to 6 to 8 flights a week. We've already had inquiries from car hire companies and a helicopter charter operator to run some tourism and charter tours through that region. So finally, the response we tried to make was in relation, and I suppose we've all heard this through the sector from the Premier and the Minister's statement around bringing forward projects, aggressively drawing down on reserves and borrow money. It was these principles that Council decided upon to bring this project forward and invest such a substantial amount. And just finally, just a little bit on the process, we're entering into a major trading undertaking in accordance with the Act. So we do require formal approval from the Minister, but we've also requested that the Minister reduce the advertising period from 6 weeks down to 3 as part of the amendment and the COVID-19 announcement. And we're hopeful that the Minister will see the same benefits as we do and make a decision on this important project for our region and give his approval. So that just about covers everything in relation to the airport. We've got some contacts there for further information. So if anybody wants to contact Chloe or anyone that was on the COVID-19 committee or myself in relation to any of that relief and stimulus, happy to take some calls and inquiries.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Really great to hear about your stimulus and support initiatives and projects. The only question that we had was you addressed a little bit about the pivot to investment to large-scale renewables. So I might just open that up to the panel as well if Nebs is still there, if there's any comment on that one.
Yeah, Evie, I'll just say, I think that's, so what I touched on in the last slide was the opportunities, obviously, don't want to sound opportunistic, but the opportunities out of COVID-19 are those pretty large scale reforms and shifts in policy in particular, because we're going to need it. I think the federal government stated that anything's on the table in that regard, and we are going to need some significant economic support. And, I mentioned tax reform, but also energy policies, another area in particular that could get a real shake-up out of this, and to provide that ongoing support to the economy. So for me, that's almost the silver lining in a way, is that, we can tackle some really hard reforms and policy shifts that maybe were off the table before this.
Excellent, thanks, Nebs. And was there anything more from East Pilbara on that?
No, just in agreement, I suppose. And as I mentioned before, I mean, we're starting to see a lot of projects that are different from traditional, iron ore, gold, and mining. And that, as I mentioned, the Asian Renewable Hub, which is 22 billion. But we're also seeing irrigated agriculture projects pop up around the Pilbara as well. And I agree. I think there's got to be that shift in policy to support things like that. To make sure that we have a different industry and different sector outside of mining within this region.
Excellent, thanks, Jeremy. So I will just wrap up the webinar now. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating, for Nebs in providing such a comprehensive economic update. That was really fantastic. And also to Chris and Jeremy for demonstrating, and Chloe, sorry, for demonstrating the really great work that's going on for your communities, and I'm sure they're very appreciative. So I'll just let you know that our next WALGA Local Government Showcase webinar is in 2 weeks from today, on the 4th of June at the same time, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And our theme is communication, how local governments have communicated with their communities, and some great examples of that. And then in the future, we'd like to continue running these webinars. So if you have any more great initiatives or programs or anything to showcase throughout the pandemic, please get in contact with the emergency management team, em@walga.asn.au. So thanks again to our fantastic presenters, and I hope you all have a lovely day. See you later.